And whilst I do love Ribena, you know what I hate, chat? You know what I really hate? I hate landlords. If you have been a long-time viewer of the show, this will not be a revelation to you that I am somewhat disliking of landlords as a class. Not a new development here. But I have not one but two pieces of content that will make you hate landlords as much as I do today. So to start with, we're going to watch a clip from the Jeremy Vine show with Christo Fufas from TalkTV debating the idea of landlords getting multiple months of rent up front as a down payment to reduce their risk. And this will tilt you out of your chair if you've ever had to deal with landlords ever before. Let's watch.
Our next topic, should landlords be allowed to charge new tenants 6 months rent up front? 0207 862 2222. MPs have voted to ban landlords from asking for more than 1 month's rent in advance. The Housing Secretary, Angela Rayner, said it would end outrageous upfront costs for new tenants. 1 in 8 landlords have asked for between 4 and 6 months of rent in advance when they take the new tenant in. And Labour said that meant renters sometimes had to pay $8,500 just to get into the door. Critics have warned that as a result of the change, though, tenants may not be able to prove that they can cover the rent long term, and they may not get the house at all. So, Christo, you are a landlord. How many properties do you have?
So can we also just start by saying, if house prices had been like normal over the last 30 years, and we'd not pumped huge amounts of liquidity into the housing market through restricted supply and quantitative easing into the pockets of property investors throughout the entirety of this period, and we were still in a world in which the average house was 4 times the average salary rather than 12 times the average salary, 4 or 6 months worth of rent is basically already almost a deposit if house prices had been normal throughout this period. So what, the median wage is about £35,000, so 4 times that is £140,000. 10% of that is 14 grand, right? So 6 months of rent up front is basically like halfway there already in some places. Although I guess those places where the rents are that high isn't the place where housing is going to be median value. But regardless, if we are in the position where people who could get a mortgage but they can't because houses are too expensive are having to just pay their deposit money for their mortgage to a landlord to then end up with literally 0 assets afterwards, then our housing market is like turbo fucked.
I have that I rent out.
Yeah, well, roughly.
3.
3. And do you think it's unfair to let a landlord say to a new tenant, I want 6 months in advance?
It's nothing to do with the government whatsoever. The arrangement that I have, as long as I am fulfilling my legal responsibilities, the financial arrangement between myself and a tenant. And what is...
Well, first of all, I'll stop you there, Christo. You say, oh, well, as long as I'm fulfilling my legal obligations. They are changing the legal obligations, therefore it is to do with you. If you believe that the government has a right to enforce legal obligations upon you, and they are changing the law so that your legal obligations change, then you have already disproved your own argument here. Second of all, this is the kind of dumb, libertarian-brained garbage, free market, fundamentalist stupidity that you hear from these people all the time. Well, this is just a free and totally voluntary transaction between 2 independent actors within a free market, except one of them will be homeless if they don't have a house, and the other person is hoarding more houses than they need. It is clearly quite not a voluntary interaction for one of these parties, because you don't really have a choice but being fucking homeless, Christo.
It's so frustrating about this is that the very people the government claims that it wants to help with this, i.e. probably people who have less money to spend on rent, who are more vulnerable, are going to be the people that suffer. Because when you are renting out a property, when you are running a business, it's about risk. And it's about the risk of whether that tenant can pay or not. Now, I'll give you an example.
Here's a tip, Christo. Here's a tip from me to you. You want to remove the risk of being a landlord? Get a real job. If you don't want to deal with the risk of being a landlord, get an actual job where you do actual work and actually contribute to society. That is an honest tip from me to you. I will get rid of all of the risk, all of the worry about tenants potentially not paying on time if you just follow my advice and get a real job.
I was renting out a property a few months ago, and I love my tenants to feel like it's home, and I meet my tenants face to face. I don't use an agent, and I always go round myself and make sure that the curtains are good. I really make sure the house is lovely for them when I rent it out. And I was then doing viewings myself, and a couple came in. He was self-employed as a gardener. She was in full-time education but worked as a barista in a coffee shop. So on paper, they were not not contract employed, not financially brilliant tenants. But they said to me, listen, actually, we'd love to rent your flat. I adored them. And they said, we can give you 3 months rent up front. And what that did was that showed me that they could afford it. It meant as well that I didn't need to charge them as much every single month because they were giving me some up front. And it meant that a tenant that would perhaps on paper be a bit more risky, I was prepared to take a chance.
But they're not risky if they have enough money to give you 3 months rent up front. If they have that much liquidity just sitting around, then they're not a risk. The kind of people who have enough money to be able to give you 3, 4, 5, 6 months rent up front, they're also the people who will have enough money spare that if they are between jobs, they won't stop paying the rent anyway. This argument completely falls apart because the actual, genuine, real tenants who get screwed over by this are people who literally have no money whatsoever, because they're the highest risk, because they're the people who are most likely to be able to default on payment, and they're also the people who cannot afford to be shelling out a decent percentage of what they could be putting as a deposit on a mortgage that would be less than the rent just to secure access to a tenancy. So, also, another point to interject into this discussion, none of these things are ever a problem if it's a council property. You don't have to care about delinquency, because if they're in the position where they can't pay the rent, then they should be getting housing assistance anyway. And that's what council housing is for. Yet, this guy, who does a worse job than the council does, for more money, whilst keeping the money for himself to put back into the property market, making it even worse, is expecting people to take on his risk by overspending money that they shouldn't have to on paying multiple months' rent in advance. This guy literally thinks he's providing a service and not gatekeeping a thing that he hoarded. Well, yeah, it's weird how these people having essentially to compete with other renters in the marketplace for who can be the most attractive renter to a potential landlord, because landlords have a lot of the power. That dynamic would completely disappear if people were given safe and secure council properties instead. And it would be cheaper, and they'd have more money to spend on things that are actually consumable goods that have had productivity gone into them, rather than continually spaffing money up the wall to rentier parasites like this fucker.
On. Now, if I could only take 1 month's rent up front, I would be less likely to take a risk on a tenant like that, and I would say, fine, I need to see that you are employed in a high-paid contract job, therefore meaning those very people that Labour claim they want to help are going to be the ones that are actually going to suffer.
Paulette, what do you say?
Okay, so we should take your properties away and make them council properties, so that everyone has access to it, regardless of whether they can pay months up front or whether they have high-paying jobs. That means everybody, regardless of their income, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their precarity, has safe and secure housing arrangements, which should be the basic thing that a normal society should provide its own fucking citizens, which we used to have as a provision for our fucking citizens. But of course, Thatcher made fuckers like this become small business tyrants overnight, and woe betide any socialist who wants to meddle in this guy's future property wealth.
Can I say that Christos is probably a good landlord. In the area I am an MP in, the landlords sometimes, not all of them, sometimes they are quite ruthless. And what they've been doing is taking lots of money. So those who can afford to pay the money up front, they have been taking it off them. But many people can't afford to pay it.
This is true. What I would absolutely take issue with here is this idea that there are loads of good landlords. No, there are no good landlords. All landlords are parasites. They're all bad. They are all rentier leeches that are economically inactive. That's what they are. They're economically inactive. They don't do work. They don't produce anything. They don't provide value. They are sucking money away from people who have real jobs and who are productive in society to then put that money back into the property market to then continue to overinflate an already overinflated market. They are toxic waste. They provide nothing. They are the real scroungers. Whilst our government tries to blame the benefits bill rising because of disability or because of joblessness, when actually unemployment is pretty low historically right now, yet when a lot of our benefits bill is being spent on housing benefit to pay for sky-high rents to fucking landlords like that Christo Bellend, charging far too much because they have realised that they have a monopoly over the supply, because they're also the same people who vote to ensure we don't have more housing being built. Whereas previously, we had council houses where instead of paying money to subsidise private rents, we were receiving money from tenants in council rent, which then could be put back into the upkeep of the council properties themselves and to expand the portfolio. So instead of receiving money for having a stock, we sold off the stock and now pay out money in housing benefit. Yet conservatism is supposed to be fiscally prudent. Doesn't seem very prudent to me, does it? Also, as has been pointed out in chat, very funny for a Labour MP to be throwing shade at slum landlords when they literally have one on their own benches in the form of Jas Athwal.
And you've got the young person who's just come out of university, probably just got their first job. They just want enough so they can at least buy their furniture. You've then got other people that want to rent a flat. Sometimes you've got men or women that have moved from a couple's relationship and they want to rent, but they can't afford the £8,000 to £10,000.
It may be wrong or right. It doesn't really matter. It's nothing to do with the government. It's his flat.
No, because we've got my caseload in Birmingham, Erdington. The largest thing that comes in is around housing. People have nowhere to live. And there are properties there, but they just can't afford to rent them because many landlords just will not consider them for one reason or another.
Okay.
So the no-fault eviction, the fact that they reduce the rental, the amount they've got to pay as rent, it means that landlords then I think they don't discriminate.
Krista,
what I'm hoping is
all of these points.
And again, I just want to point out, as I always do whenever this conversation comes up, every single kind of market is a function of state policy. There is no such thing as a natural market. Every single market that's ever existed has been a function of state policy. It is always the role of government to shape how those markets work, whether through a laissez-faire or through intervention. I don't care which one you want to do. I have a preference, of course, for interventionist politics, hence why I'm supporting this measure. But regardless of which one that you want to do, both of these are a function of state policy. So to say, well, this market transaction has nothing to do with the government, like bollocks is it? Of course it's to do with the government. The government set up the market in the fucking first place. They can chop and change it if they like to in the future. When they have a democratic mandate to do so, which they do, because rental reforms were quite literally in the manifesto.
Policies, what they're doing is they're making landlords leave the market. 1 in 4 properties for sale at the moment in London are buy-to-let properties that landlords are disposing of. And when you reduce the supply of something,
But he's wrong. The supply of rented accommodation hasn't decreased. What they are looking at is the number of properties being sold. Landlords are leaving the market, true. But the houses are being bought, a lot of the time, by other landlords. The overall stock of rental housing hasn't significantly dropped at all. Sure, there are some landlords that have sold up, and the house doesn't disappear. It's either going to get bought by another landlord who will then rent it out, or be bought by a previous renter who will become an owner-occupier and therefore reduce the demand. It's 1 in, 1 out. This argument is just so nonsense. It's 100% pure unmitigated bollocks to try and claim that these rules that you're applying to landlords to, make them essentially behave like actual human beings rather than leeches, or approximations of human beings at least, are somehow reducing the number of actual properties available when the property is entirely independent of whether it's owned by a landlord or not. Because if they sell and it goes to a landlord, then the number of rental properties available is the same. And if they sell it to an owner-occupier, then that's a person who previously was renting who now isn't. So the demand and supply have dropped by 1, so it doesn't change the equation.
really worries me, and I say this as someone who wants tenants to have nice places to live, is that you're going to end up in a situation where there are going to be fewer properties, so those tenants are going to end up paying more because there are fewer properties around, and actually those people that the Labour claim they want to help are going to end up suffering.
Right, let's talk to Anthony, who's in Blackpool. You're
Let me just find the data on this. I'm just to make sure I'm not just making this shit up, because I'm pretty sure I've seen the data on this. Number of rental properties UK over time. Let's see. There you go. Number of households occupied by private renters in England from 2000 to 2023. There was a bit of a dip in the pandemic, 2020 and 2021, but the number of rented has basically stayed pretty stagnant, around about the 4.6 mark from 2017 until now.
I'm a landlord.
Right, what do you make of this, that you won't be able to take more than a month up front?
I think it's absolutely disgusting that the government is interfering so much with landlords. I buy properties and I have spent 35 years doing them up to a very, very high standard, taking them from slums to show homes.
Okay, so you have increased the value of the commodity. If you feel like that you've increased the exchange value of your commodity by applying labour to it, then you can sell it as a commodity which you've applied value to. Great, you're a developer. More power to you. People who engage in labour to do up properties, that take rundown properties, do labour and transform them by actually doing work on them and developing them, more power to you. You've increased the exchange value of the commodity. And even then you say, well, I've put all this work in. At the end of that, you'll still own the fucking house. You'll have done up your own house. I have done up this house. What, do you think these walls got painted purple by magic? No, I did it for myself. Do I expect to get paid money for it? No, of course I don't. I did it because it's my house.
Top quality accommodation, and the government has taken all the tax relief off the mortgage so that the landlords can't even earn a living. So they're...
You are not earning a living. Your tenants are earning a living, and you are leeching money out of them like the fucking parasite that you are. Your tenants do work. They are productive. They contribute to society. You sit on your arse collecting your tithe. Oh, well, I've done work doing up the house. Yeah, you have done up your house. You own the house. You have increased the value of that. That's not going to go away, whether or not the tenants are there or not, because that's the value of the commodity itself.
selling up in the thousands and thousands, creating a housing shortage. Surely, if a landlord has spent 25% deposit down on a property, then they've got the responsibility of all the mortgage, all the...
Okay. Anthony, come here. A little bit closer. Come on. If you can't afford the mortgage payments, that's not my fucking problem. These conservative types, they're all about personal responsibility until you tell them to pay for their own fucking mortgage. Oh, are you saying I can't have somebody else buy my house for me? I've paid for the deposit. I should get somebody else to pay for it. Take some personal responsibility, friendo. Maybe if he can't afford the mortgage, he should be cutting out the lattes. Cancel Netflix. Have you considered taking a packed lunch to the job that you've not got? That would save you a bunch of money than ordering Uber. Too much avocado toast, these boomers, isn't it? Can't trust him. And then they go moaning to the government when they can't get somebody else to buy their house for them. They should be out there putting their nose to the grindstone if they want to be able to have a second house. Because again, this isn't their first rodeo. This isn't their first bite of the cherry. They've already had their first helping of main course. And they're going back for seconds, while some people haven't even had their first course yet.
repairs. Then Blackpool is also putting selective licensing on, which good landlords get absolutely nothing for.
And the increased stamp duty, Anthony, and the increased stamp duty you've paid to buy that property.
Tough. Whether that was going to be a tenanted house or a holiday home, it's a second house, you should pay stamp duty. That's how that works. Tough shit.
Also, now there's capital gains have increased. There's no way that a landlord can earn a living. And, if a
Good. And again, you're not earning anything. Earning is when you actually do work and you be productive to make some money. You are not earning anything. You are sitting on your fat behind, stealing money from hardworking people.
Landlord
Yeah,
can't
but isn't,
earn a living.
Anthony, isn't their aim to stop you earning a living? Because what they want you to do is
Yes.
to sell your properties so that then people can buy them and own them as private residents. And they understandably, they want more people to own houses.
But the people in general that rent, not all obviously, can never afford to save a deposit to buy their own house. They are never usually in a position. Lots of people on benefits, etc., with
Why do you think they can't afford to save up for a deposit? Anthony, why do you think that they can't afford to become a private owner of their own home? The mortgage payments each month are cheaper than the rent. Hence why you can make a profit off of the scalping that you do. They cannot save up for the deposit because they are paying you rent every single month. This is why they can't afford the fucking deposit. Mortgages are affordable because they're already paying you the rental payments that would be paying for a mortgage. They just can't afford to save up for a deposit because you are taking all their fucking money.
disabilities that can't work need rental properties to live in. And if the government drives all the landlords out, they have to put people up in emergency temporary accommodation.
It's true. I mean, it's true. If they can't find somewhere to rent privately, they would have to go into temporary accommodation. Wouldn't it be great if we had this system where instead of the government having to put you in emergency temporary accommodation, the government had this big stock of good quality, affordable housing, say owned by like, I don't know, local authorities potentially, which had like low rents because all the money went back into maintenance and wasn't used for profit to buy up more housing. And these were being done on a larger scale across the country to kind of secure tenancies. So they would be able to put them in there at a discounted rate if you were somebody who was on welfare, for example. You didn't have to get put into temporary accommodation. You could go into one of these local authority properties. Let's call them local authority properties. Unfortunately, such a system doesn't exist and has never existed. So Anthony's right. He's just right. It would be a massive cost to the state for the landlords to go out the market. So unfortunately, there is no alternative.
Another landlord, John, is in Bedfordshire. Do you charge 6 months up front, John?
Yeah, to some tenants. What I do is I offer flexible payment plans. We have a set monthly fee. But if someone wants to pay 3 months in advance, we offer them discount, or 6 months in advance, offer discounts.
Yeah.
So
What you're doing there is allowing people who are richer to pay less. It's Vimes Boots theory all over again. If you have enough money to be able to shell out in one go, you pay less than people who have no money have to pay monthly. Like, I'm sure you think that it's a good thing for giving people security, and maybe that's fair enough from your perspective. But in terms of overall utility, you are charging richer people less than you're charging poor people if you give people who can afford to pay all at once a discount.
new rule is doing is actually making tenants lose the option of payment allowance, and is actually putting up their rent.
I wonder what will happen, because I'm sure that it's very hard to stop landlords doing certain other things in terms of taking deposits and stuff. And I don't, it may be that actually that you increase the deposit, because
you're not allowed. You're only allowed to take 5 weeks.
4 to 6 weeks.
Deposit. A maximum of I think it's 5 weeks is the maximum now that you can take. So all of this is just going to make landlords either sell, or it's going to make them say, well, you know what, I'm only going to go for those really high earning, low risk tenants, and that's going to be the very people that Labour claim that they want to help with this.
Again, how about we just get rid of landlords and have council housing? Like, just obviously the solution here, if your worry is, well, people who are poor won't be able to do it even though they can't actually afford all these massive deposits and massive amount up front, which you say is the way in which you mitigate the risk, but they can't do that, so they're shit out of luck in either system. How about put them up in council houses? But unfortunately, all these council houses that got sold off are now owned by people like this fine specimen.
And that's what I just can't get my head around it. One just very other quick point, that you're also seeing now corporations like BlackRock and others building to rent, right? So they're building massive complexes to rent themselves. Good luck with a huge corporation if you're late with your rent for a few days, rather than ringing me or one of you callers, John, and saying, I can't pay for a couple of days.
I hate this argument so much. It's the same thing that Samuel Leeds said in his video about this too, where they said, well, the corporate landlords are coming to take over the mum and pop landlords. And I'm just like, both scum. I don't give a shit whether you're a big corporation or a small business tyrant. I couldn't give one single solitary shit whether or not you are a big or a small landlord. The relationship is parasitic regardless. I have the same opinion of both of you. Ironically, in my time when I was a renter, I had much better time renting from big companies than I did from small landlords, because businesses just want to take their money and go. They don't care. When it's a small-time landlord, their property is their little nest egg. It's their little cherished extra house. It's their second home. And so they get really, really fucking awful about checking in and doing viewings and keeping the deposit. They're the absolute worst dealing with the little small-time landlords. But again, I don't care. It's both bad. They're both bad either way. I do not support BlackRock being landlords or Christo Fufas being a landlord. You're both awful. You're both parasites. You're both leeches. You're both totally unproductive. You both are something society does not need. If your argument is, well, if these landlords sell the houses, and that means BlackRock and Vanguard can buy them, which is bad. Don't get me wrong, it's bad. It gets monopolized by these big corporations. You should ban it. You should ban big private equity firms buying up private housing. We should have done that years ago. Like, TSB have been on the market in the UK for ages trying to buy up private housing. America's already kind of at the sharp end of this. They should have banned it years ago. They shouldn't have been allowed in the first place. Moving on to our second half of this landlord hate segment. If you really want to understand the sharp end of why landlords are scum, look at this fucker, right? I'm 35 and I own a property empire worth £2.8 million. He now has plans to retire at age 40. Brilliant, brilliant. I'm going to do no work for a decade and then never work again for the rest of my life. Well, it's interesting that he thinks that he can retire at 40 while still being a landlord. Kind of shows that it's not really a job if you can be a landlord and also be retired at the same time, huh? Weird how that works, isn't it? Now age 35, Bunn has 15 properties all rented out and a portfolio worth £2.8 million. He buys in and around Teesside, County Durham, but has a strict set of criteria, including that properties come at a discount. They aren't necessarily run down, but they are always discounted in some way so I can add a bit of value. With one property, the seller needed the money quickly, so he gave me a 30% discount. The property was rentable from day one. A year later, I remortgaged and it was worth a lot more. Literally, another example of this guy being able to pay in cash because he's richer than everybody else and are getting a lower price because of it. Again, things are more expensive if you're poor. This is what we're seeing from all of this. The earlier you can become a homeowner, the less you have to spaff away on rent. That is money that you've not gained anything. You've thrown it away. You might as well have incinerated it to pay money in rent. At least when you have paying a mortgage, you're paying down money on an asset that you then pay off eventually. Bunn gets £9,500 a month in gross rental income, but has to pay out £3,500 in mortgage payments, £900 on estate agents for finding tenants and providing a fully managed service, and around £900 a month on maintenance. This leaves him with approximately £4,000 net profit a month. And I will never, ever, ever allow any landlord ever in the future come moaning at me about the increase in mortgage payments. Oh, well, the base rate has gone up, so my mortgage is more expensive, when we all know the hikes that you get in terms of rent versus mortgage payments. There is no reason at all. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever that this man should be making £4,000 a month net profit when those £3,500 in mortgage payments could be being paid by the tenant and they'd still have money left over. Still have money left over, even after paying for the mortgages, even after paying for the maintenance. This man makes more than double what it would cost for the tenants to be paying the mortgages instead so that they could own the houses, and also do the maintenance on the properties that they would then end up owning. And the only reason he is allowed to do this and make huge amounts of profit out of doing literally nothing, but being a useless, parasitic leech, is because he happens to be rich and these people didn't. Contracts out finding tenants to an estate agent. He subcontracts out maintenance to tradespeople. He literally sits on his fucking arse collecting £4,000 a month of tithes from his renters, who then also pay to buy him a house on top of it. It's criminal. It's absolutely criminal that you can literally buy somebody a house and also pay for more than that. Like, they are paying more in profit for him than he is paying for his own houses. This is insane. This system is fucking insane. Facts I found. Private renters aged 16 to 24 spend nearly half of their income on housing costs, 46.5%. More than a third of landlords are retired in England. The number of rental homes in England has increased by over a third, 36%, from 6.3 million in 1990 to 8.6 million in 2023. Well, there you go. It is just this absolute shift wealth from the younger generations to the boomers, who had all of the best of the housing, they got all of the benefits of right to buy, they got all the benefits of buy-to-let mortgages, and now they're the ones essentially sitting around doing nothing, which is fine. You can be retired and sit around doing nothing. That's what the pension is for. That's what the state pension is for. You don't need to be a fucking landlord and rinsing money out of young people who can't afford to buy houses because you happen to get lucky when Thatcher was selling off our council properties, which the young people nowadays should be renting. They should be renting the council properties that got sold to the boomers to then rent at triple the price, and also being subsidised by housing benefit from the government because the young people have such shitty wages because of the governments these boomers voted for that they can't afford the rents. Much of the attraction of being a landlord for Bun is the location and time freedom he gets to spend here with his young family. It's passive income so I can go away with the kids. Literally admitting that he's economically inactive. Literally admitting that he is waste. He is complete waste. He's a scrounger. That he is scrounging off of actual hard-working people. But having a pension, he also plans to retire at 40, keeping the property he's going to pass on to his children in the future, so his kids will have done even less work than him, and will just be gifted huge numbers of properties paid for by the kids of poor people who couldn't afford to buy a house themselves because they couldn't afford a deposit because they were paying this fucker more than double the cost of the mortgage on the property they're renting from him. It is class warfare. It is both class and generational warfare. And no doubt, his cosseted and disgusting little offspring, they will then become landlords themselves and will be renting to their own peers who didn't have rich parents. Landlords are just the worst. Chairman Mao, please wake up. We need you now more than ever. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.